Hi friends, so in this blog I am going to help you understand the Azure Big Data Engineering environment and set that up with best practices. I've got numerous queries across on this topic and so I decided to take some time out and help you provision all of this hands-on. So the next 20-25 minutes, the agenda is pretty tight. We will be covering provisioning most of the Azure Big Data services and then link them up with all the best security principles, the key vaults and all of that, develop a pipeline for copying data and transforming that, a sample pipeline on Azure Data Bricks, and then connecting that with the Azure Data Factory and running that all over. And this will be a little long video. I can caution you with that, but the information shared across will be really helpful. So I would request you to watch out for some of the nitty-gritties and the important details that I cover across. So to start with, I have a clean slate, and I'm going to start with this clean canvas, starting from the resource group. So let's call a fictitious project Titan, and for Titan we are attempting to develop or we are attempting to set up the big data engineering environment. So let's get started. So I am going to create a new resource group where all of the resources can be provisioned. Let me call that DE Titan RG. Let's have this in East US and let's create this RG, and that's done. So sure, let's refresh that. We have the DE Titan RG created. Let me pin this up on my dashboard and quickly jump onto my dashboard. There you go. Now let's get started by provisioning the services. So I start with the data lake. Okay, let me create this. Let's call this the Titan ADLS. And yeah, that's all good. And while this is provisioning, let me quickly add the blob store as well. Storage account, and let's call this and let's use East US 2 and review and create this. Okay, that's done. Now let's go back and create the key vault. Okay, that creates the key vault. And then let me again jump back and create my data factory for all my pipelines, data transformation pipelines. Yeah, let's create this. Let's call it ADF use existing. I have my resource group. I do not want to enable the Git yet. Maybe we can have another video and I can walk you through the DevOps process, but right now we are just trying to set up the environment. So there you are. And then let's create the Databricks. Let's call this ADB use existing. Yeah, and then let's do a trial version. Awesome. So we have some of the resources already configured. So I think we have provisioned the resource group, the data lake, the key vault, the data storage, and all of this. Now let's jump on. Sorry, let's jump on the SPN creations for this particular project. So app registrations. Let's say a new registration. Let's call it the Titan, and let's call it SPN. And let me copy this as well and register this SPN. It is done. Now while I do this, let me save this. The SPN name here, that's my SPN. Let's copy the client ID is the application ID, and let's create a key here. Copy this as well, add this, and SPN key is this, and let's also save this, the value, that's the key, and then the tenant ID. So let's just jump back on the overview. Here we should find the tenant ID or the directory ID. So let's copy that as well, and that's all set from the SPN side. And then so that's done. Now grant permissions for the SPN onto the data lake. So now we are going to jump onto our data lake. There you go, you have the data lake. Let's go ahead and create two folders. Let's call it raw, and then let's have one more. Let's call it cooking. Done. Now let's provide access onto this data lake to the SPN that we have created. So I'm going to say the Titan and the SPN. That's the one right now. So for the SPN, we are going to give all the permissions for this data lake, and that's done. That's from the permissions side. We are all set. Now let's jump on the key vault savings for this. Now before we do that, we need to take a look at the data bricks that we have configured. So let me jump back and let's refresh this. I think we should have the data bricks created as well. So let's launch the workspace. So Databricks is for our compute. The data lake was for our storage and the blob as well. So let's take a look. Let's try to sign this with our A80. Yeah, get me in. What's wrong here? That's weird. That's done. Now this is the Azure Data Bricks and the secret scope that we need to create to give access to the key vault. So let me push this and let's just copy this part and just add the secret scope. So this hyperlink becomes. So here what we are going to do is basically create a scope name, Titan, and let's copy the name as well and then save it here, the scope name, and then let's jump on to our key vault. So what we are trying to do here is we are basically trying to provide access to our key vault from the Databricks. So basically Databricks script should be able to connect to the key vault and get the passwords to be able to access the data lake and blobs and so on and so forth. So then the properties here, we should have the resource ID. We're going to copy this and we're going to paste the resource ID and create this. So this will create our scope. That's done. The scope is done. Now let's also create a token. So I go to the settings, I say generate token. This is for data engineering development. Let's call this and generate this for 90 days and then copy this and then save the token. This is a really important one. So perfect, that's done. Now once this is done, now start configuring the secrets onto our, let's call it ADB token, Azure Databricks token. So I am going to copy the token and I'm going to save it here and say create. That's done. Now I'm going to create a SPN ID, service principal ID, and that will be my client ID. So just copy this client ID, paste it here, we're done. Next is my service principal key. So let's copy this and create, let's call this SPN key. Basically we are feeding this all of this into the key vault so that we will be accessing the key vault, and this will be a centralized place for all our keys, so we can maintain that easily and also enable the right security settings as per need. So that's really necessary. So that's done. Now let's also just jump on to portal and also add the blob key. That's important. So the blob key, let's call this key and add the secret value. That's done, more or less. Yeah, that's done. So let's jump back. We have created the token, saved it, all of that, log on to all of this. Now what we are going to do is upload two basic files, right, into our ADLS. So into my raw, I'm going to import two basic files. Let's try to upload here. Let's see. Yeah, employee file, done. Let me try to upload the department file, done. Let me try to refresh this. We have both the files. So these are just for the demo purposes. We're just trying to use this file from raw and process this. Now this is done. The next step will be logging on to the data factory. Let's log on to the data factory and stitch this all. So that's our data factory that we have created. Now let's create the first important part is the key vault. So the link service to the key vault is something that we need to create so that we can access most of the details from the keys from the key vault. Key vault, okay, subscriptions, and let's call this key vault, and here you get a managed application ID. So this, the first and the only one time that you need to basically go on to your key vault and allow your key vault and the access policies, you just need to add this to be able to, so that your data factory is able to access your key vault. So yeah, the ADF should be able to, and here you need to say, you should be able to, the data factory should be able to get the secrets not override or do anything more than get. So it's just the read permissions that you're allowing, and you save this, and that's saved for you. That's great. Now let's jump back to the data factory. Yeah, and let's try to test the connection. Done. So that is basically the first key vault link service that we have created. That's great. So the next part is actually setting up the link service for the data lake. Let's call this data lake gen 1. Okay, and let's call this ls adls, and that's great. Yeah, similar, the account name, the tenant. Instead of the managed identity, let's use the service principal. The service principal ID is your client ID. So let's jump back, copy the client ID, and then we get the key, retrieve the key from the key vault. So we configured that, and the secret name is the SPN key. That's the one. So let's test the connection based on this. That's done. So we have our data lake configured as well. The next step is the compute. So let's try to configure the Databricks link service as well. So let's call this ls adb, and we have the workspace existing. Yeah, we need to create a cluster. So let's jump back to adb and maybe create a cluster here. Let's call it demo or Titan. Titan cluster, yeah, let me have a basic one. Let me have this configured to 60, and then let's create this. And this may take some time to get configured. So for the access token, let's get it from the key vault. This is the secret name is ADB, and what was that? I think it was ADB key or ADB token. Let's jump back. It is called ADB token. Perfect. So it's called ADB token, and then we are going to choose or configure the cluster. Now here we are going to use a interactive cluster, which means it's already set up. The cluster is already there. Alternatively, we can also configure it to a job cluster, which means it will be created each time. It will be used by your pipeline to process, and then it will be basically use and diffuse kind of thing. So yeah, let's test this. Done. So we have completed for all the link service creations. Now what we are going to do is the actual the pipeline creation. So let's copy this demo code here. It is a very simple one. So basically we are reading the two files from the Azure Data Lake, the employee and the department, and then we are um, writing back the transformed file into the blob store. So let's create a workspace folder here for us for our code. So let's call it dev. Created a folder. Inside dev, let me just try to create a notebook. Process employee data. So I'm just calling that, and then let's copy paste this code and try to see what we have in here. So for starters, What we have is the blob storage and the ADLS store name coming in as a widget. So which means it will be passed from the data factory in the runtime. That's the right way to do this. And then we have the secret scope configuration. So basically, let me configure the secret scope while the cluster is still provisioning. So the secret scope name that we kind of add, yeah, dev titan dev scope. So based on the secret scope, it is going to connect to your key vault and it is going to fetch the key for SPN ID here. Make sure the name is as per your key vault here. So we have the SPN ID and the SPN key. So those are the ones that you should be mentioning in your notebook here. So that's the SPN key, and this is the secret scope, right? And the tenant ID is something that is the directory ID. We already copied that when we were provisioning, configuring our, that's the tenant ID. So copy this, and that's for your authorization and authentication. And the blob, right? So overview for the blob. Let me create a container here to start with. I'm calling this container um, dev. Okay, so let's jump back, and the storage, okay, the scope is the same for the container, and then the storage key is actually blob key. So yeah, that's the blob key. That's the blob key. The blob storage is, yeah, that's fine. That's good enough. So here it should be the data lake store name. So let's just configure this. This should be a dynamic thing. Yeah, that's done. And then at the end of it, I think we need to provide the container name. The container name was dev in our case. So for the blob. So basically, I'm just trying to show you for both the stores. So we are retrieving from one of the stores and we are writing it to the next one. That's the data lake and the blob store. So that this demo will be helpful to you, and it'll add more sense. So let's just run this before, as a developer, before even we jump on, configuring this as a pipeline. Um, and there you go. So we have the D Titan ADLS and D Titan blob. So yeah, we need to give this DE Titan ADLS, DE Titan OP, D Titan ADLS, and the Titan blob. So that's the code um, configured. So this both of these values will be actually passed at the runtime from the pipeline. So the next part is actually connecting to the ADLS, reading both of the files, that is our raw department and employee files from the data lake, using that to just extract and sum up the salary based on the departments. A very simple join that I've written just for the demo purpose, and then write the final file, aggregated file, into the blob. So that's all we're trying to do here. Let's see, and we will be the Titan key vault. Okay, let's just check here. Keyvault.net. Okay, so let's just try to see what went wrong with the configuration. So that's the secret scope. that we had created. And then that's the key for what.net. Yeah, perfect. So properties, resource ID. It's done. Now, what was the secret scope name? Let's see. So I just recreated the scope again with a different name. So just calling it secret scope as of now. And based on that, we are attempting to run this. Let's just try to see. Oh, yeah. So this code will now access the data lake based on the scope. And retrieve the keys and then try to kind of write this into the value into our blob. So that's that. Now let's see. It's still running. So maybe I'll just pause for a while and then get back. So that starts reading the data from the data lake, and then yeah, the transformation is running fine. Now let's see. Yeah, so that's run. And let's refresh this. We have the aggregated file here. We have the CSV. Let's try to edit this blob. And there you go. This is like the aggregated values. So yeah, the code is all set now. Now we can jump back to the data factory and try to create a new pipeline. Let's call it VL employee. And what I'm going to do is just drop the notebook task here. Notebook, and then the link service that we have configured. Let's just browse the path. We have the notebook, the one that we created right now. Yes, don't forget to add the widgets, I mean the parameters here. So we call the first one blob storage, and let's pass the value. Let's add one more for the data lake. And let's pass the value. That's done. And let's publish this. That's all we have. That was fairly simple. So the pipeline is done. Now let's try to debug this pipeline and see if that runs well for us. So as you can see, the pipeline takes the path of the Databricks workspace folder where we have run and the blob storage and the data lake storage name. So that's all it's going to take. Now based on this parameters, it creates also the link of the run. So if you see now, we will get to see what all has been passed as parameters, right? And it succeeded, so it gives you the details of all of the run that has happened, and also the file has been generated. So yeah, of course. So yeah, end to end, basically this brings us to the end of this video blog. What we have learned is setting up this entire environment right from and stitching it through from the data factory to the Azure Data Bricks, and also setting up all through the Key Vault enabled, and also using the two storages, the most common on the Azure, that is the data lake and the blobs. So all in all, this is like a fun video where you kind of get a hang of what a Azure Enterprise Big Data Engineering environment could look like. I hope it adds some sort of a value, and let me know your feedback, and and if there is more to this that you would like to know about. Of course, there is a telemetry aspect um, on each of these things, which can be enabled through Azure log analytics, and also there is the DevOps aspect, which we can further maybe take a look at the next set of videos if need be. So thanks for now, and I hope it's helpful to you. Thank you.